You're listening to the Financial Sense News.
They should be moving one way on interest rates, and then we had people thinking that they should move the other way on interest rates as well. So it was a real mixed bag as far as where the Fed was. And it's the kind of the least important thing out of the meeting is the one that we usually talk about is what was their outlook for the economy? That's so dependent on the chairman, but in 3 weeks, we're going to get a new chairman. So it almost is a moot point what Powell said about the economy because he's not going to be the guy there in just a couple of more weeks.
What do you think changes with Warsh?
I think the big thing that's changing because of Warsh is the nature of how the Fed votes. Like I said, we have 4 dissenting votes. The Fed, it's now becoming clear that the voters at the Fed are now independent voters. They will judge the economy themselves and they will come to a conclusion as to what they think is the right policy. In other words, no longer is the way the Fed works is we look at the chairman, we parse every word the chairman says, and then we divine what Fed policy is going to be. The chairman is one of 12 votes. So he's got to be a person that not only can articulate a position, and I think that Warsh will articulate a dovish position and maybe lean towards potentially cutting rates, but he's got to get 6 other voters to agree with him to do that. Now, at the March meeting, the meeting before this one, there was no dissenters that were thinking that the Fed needed to be more hawkish. This meeting, there were 3. It's very possible if the price of oil stays up, inflation stays sticky, you could see 5 or 6 at the next meeting. Now, if price of oil goes the other way, the economy goes the other way, obviously that will change. So I think the biggest thing is the Fed has been so worried about this independence that the president will be, run roughshod over the Fed and tell them what to do and how to do it and stuff like that, that they finally solved the problem that I've been very critical of is this groupthink that one person makes the decision. That's not the case anymore. So Warsh has got a different task in front of him. It's not only articulate a position, but it's to get 6 other people to agree with him. Otherwise, that position won't become monetary policy.
Well, let's talk about oil itself. They're concerned. First, it was tariffs, which they thought might lead to inflation. Now it's the price of oil with the war. You and I were talking before we went on the air. The price of oil is, what, 122 right now?
Yes. In fact, it's over 122 as we're talking on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. And so this is a spike in oil as a result of a geopolitical situation. I don't think there's anything the Fed can do about creating more barrels of oil. So, what do they do in a situation where it's really being caused by a war?
They can't do anything about it, is the short answer. But there's 2 things that they have to be aware of. What does it mean for inflation and the growth of the economy? And the chairman said in the meeting today, and they're very accurate when it comes to this. In fact, it's not hard to do. That they think that their preferred measure of inflation is what's called personal consumption expenditure, or PCE, that April's PCE will be 3.5% year over year. So they're well off their 2% target up at 3.5%. And yes, a large reason that it's going to be that high is going to be the price of energy. So they can't do anything to bring down the price of energy. But what they also have to be careful of on the other side of the equation is what is happening with energy. And I'll put it this way. Before the war, somewhere between 100 and 105 million barrels of oil was consumed by everybody, the whole globe, every day. And we produced, we being all the oil production in the world, about 100 to 105 million barrels of oil a day, keeping the example very simple. Now we have this choke point at the Strait of Hormuz, and oil is not getting out. So we have now something around 95 to 93 million barrels of oil being produced a day. But the world cannot consume 105 anymore because we don't make 105. That's the fancy word the economists use. It's called demand destruction. In other words, somebody has to not consume 10 to 15 million barrels of oil a day. Somebody's got to not fill up their car, if you want to put it bluntly. Now, two things about that somebody is, one, they're largely in Asia because that's where most of the Middle East oil goes to Asia. It doesn't go to the US, but it's a global market, so we do see the higher prices, but we don't have the shortages. But in Western Australia, the Philippines, India, they definitely are seeing the shortages. But second of all, the way we decide who's not going to consume those last 10 or 13 million barrels of oil a day is the price. The price goes up in order to shut out the marginal buyer to get everything back into balance. The concern you have to have is that if the answer from a Federal Reserve is, well, the price of oil's up, and that's really hurting people, so we need to stimulate the economy, what you're telling them is nobody needs to consume less oil. And if nobody consumes less oil, then the price will just keep going up until it gets everything back into balance. So not only the Fed, but all the other central banks, you don't want to be in the position of trying to subsidize those higher prices. We have those higher prices for a reason. And that reason is we need some demand destruction. And if you prevent that demand destruction, the market will just take the price even higher. So I think what they have to be careful of is not trying to feed those higher prices by cutting interest rates on the argument that, it's weakening the economy. Now, on the flip side, do they need to raise interest rates because of it? That really depends on whether or not you think this is going to be somewhat permanent. If you believe this is going to be something temporary, it's going to last a matter of weeks to a couple of more months, probably not. But if we are going to see elevated levels of oil prices for a while, several months or a year, then you could make the case that the new equilibrium rate or the natural interest rate would be higher and they might have to raise rates. But that's an open question right now. We don't know how this is going to play itself out.
Let me throw something that is a political curve out there with this blockade. Iran is still producing oil, but they can't get that oil onto ships because the ships are bottled up. At some point, they're going to have to start shutting down their wells. And that's a whole new problem in itself, Jim, because you can't go to an oil well, flip a switch and turn it back on just like you could the lights in your house.
That's true. And a couple of things about that. That is the current position of the administration, and the new military strategy is to try and put so much economic pain on Iran as that they would then come to the negotiating table and then we would have a lasting peace. I hope that's the case, but color me skeptical. And color me skeptical for two reasons. Reason one, I think we in the West underestimate the amount of pain the Iranian regime is willing to endure to not have to go to the negotiating table and have a ceasefire on American terms. I'll remind everybody, I know it almost seems like a conspiracy theory, but no one's doubting it. We're just arguing about the number, that their economy was struggling in December and they had protests. In January, the regime in Iran gave their answer to those protests. They killed thousands of their citizens that were protesting in the street. Now, the administration says it's as many as 40,000. The Iranian government says it was only 3,100. So even they admit they killed thousands. It's just a few thousand, not tens of thousands. So thousands of people were shot in the streets because they were saying that the price of chicken was too high. That's their answer to economic pain. And I think that we underestimate how much pain that they are willing to take. Now, on the oil thing, if you look at a chart of Iranian oil production, they shut down their wells from 5 million to under 1 million barrels in 2020 during COVID. It can be done in a way that is not deleterious to their oil production. They did it 6 years ago. So did basically everybody else because the world economy was shut down. And so they went to under 1 million barrels. It's possible that they can do it. Whether or not they can or if they're being rushed to do it, that is the open question. But even if they are, not able to properly shut down their walls or reduce their production without causing long-term damage. The assumption we're all operating under is that will get them to the table. And what I'm afraid of is it won't get them to the table. And that where are we going to be then? The Strait of Hormuz is going to stay closed. Oil's not going to continue to move. And the world price of oil will continue to go higher because every day, why does the world price of oil continue to go higher? Because every day we want the world economy wants 105 million barrels a day. Every day we get about 90 to 95. So every day we come up short. That deficit keeps growing every day. And that's why it keeps putting upward pressure on the price of oil.
And it's my understanding that the Revolutionary Guard basically run the country. They're involved in banking, the industry. So it's a lifestyle for them to survive.
Exactly. And if there's any kind of a ceasefire agreement, they might not even survive anyway. Because, if there is a ceasefire and a deal and the oil starts moving, they could be in such a weakened position that they could eventually see a revolution in the country. And of course, if you're Islamic Revolutionary Guard member, revolution in the country doesn't mean that they change the leadership of the country. That means they kill you first, and then they change the leadership of the country. That's why I think that the men with the guns, the IRGC, the amount of pain they're willing to take, and we saw what they did to their own population in January when they were protesting. I fear we're underestimating the pain, that they will take much greater pain than we think, meaning the price of oil will stay. And to that end, about 30 minutes before we started talking, there was a Twitter feed from the Iranian Speaker of the Parliament. He's active on Twitter, along with the foreign minister. Ghalibab is his name. And he basically said, the wells are fine, price is 120, next stop 140. That's their bet. Their bet is if we hold out, the price will go to 140, then the price will go higher, and then the price will go higher, and then the pain threshold will shift to the west in paying enormously high petrol prices. So that's kind of the high stakes game of chicken that we're playing right now.
Are you positioned for the next wave in commodities? Reach out to Financial Sense Wealth Management to discuss how our advisors can help you gain exposure to the growing commodity sector. Call today at 888-486-3939 to learn more about options for diversifying your portfolio. Advisory services offered through Financial Sense Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities offered through Financial Sense Securities, member FINRA SIPC. Doing business as Financial Sense Wealth Management.
You also have to take a look, and of course, Trump is seeing this in the polls. You start getting up to, we got up to a brief period, I know in LA, gasoline prices got up to close to $8. They're very high now. You can imagine what they're going to be if we get up to 140 or 150.
Yeah, the national average, I looked this up this morning, the national average of gasoline is $4.23 a gallon. I know that sounds dirt cheap if you live in California. And the price of gasoline was $2.98 a gallon the day before the war. So it's up $1.25. So to put that in perspective for everybody, every time you fill up your car, it's an extra $25 because of the war. And right now, if you ask me, what is that doing to the economy? I would say not a whole lot, meaning most people go to the pump, see the price, probably have a choice four-letter word they mumble under their breath, and then they fill up their car and they continue on their life and do what they were going to do anyway. They're not saying, man, I'm going to have to stop doing something because of how expensive it is to fill my car. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but maybe it does later on. So all we're seeing from this war is not a whole lot of slowdown in economic activity, but higher inflation. And so that is, in parlance, nominal GDP, which is real plus inflation. That growth, nominal growth, is going up because we're getting more inflation. We're not offsetting it with weaker economic growth. And normally interest rates follow nominal growth. And so while we're getting higher nominal growth, the other thing that happened the day we're recording on Wednesday afternoon is the 30-year yield touched 5% for the first time since July of last year. So we're also starting to see interest rates start to creep higher on the back of that higher nominal growth. Now, if it gets to the point and where we get more of a slowdown in the real economy than we were to get more inflation, then nominal growth would decline, and then you would probably see falling interest rates.
So the elephant in the room, let's just say that they hold off, thinking that once prices get to 140, 150, obviously that is going to be very, very painful that the Trump administration moves to reconcile some kind of peace deal with them that they can walk away and say we had victory.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the one concern that you'd have is whether you agreed with this war or didn't agree with this war, there is a situation that needs to get resolved, and that is opening the Strait of Hormuz. It cannot stay this way. The Iranians cannot impose a toll on the strait. Just if for no other reason, the largest shipping choke point in the world is the Strait of Malacca. And Indonesia has already made noise in the last week. Well, there's twice as much shipping that goes through the Strait of Malacca than there is through the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe Malaysia, should start charging a toll to go through the Strait of Malacca. And then if Tangier wants to start imposing a toll on going through the Strait of Gibraltar and on and on and on, world shipping and globalization will come to a grinding halt at that point. So we need to resolve this situation, whether we like it or not. I won't assign blame. I'll just say the Strait of Hormuz is broken. It has to be fixed. The worst thing I think we could do is say, they're not going to get a nuclear weapon for many years. We've so degraded their nuclear capability, which is true and which is good. We've accomplished our primary goal. Military's packing up and we're going home. And you're like, well, wait, they're still charging a toll and they're still in charge of the strait. Well, it's not our problem. If we were to take that attitude and do that, I think we would make the situation materially worse. So like it or not, we have to resolve this situation, hopefully peacefully, hopefully through an agreement, and not through some kinetic action through a war and killing people to do it. But it needs to get resolved. It cannot be left in this situation.
What do you think about the UAE pulling out of OPEC?
It's interesting. A comment I heard from somebody was the game of chicken, we're talking about is who blinks first. Does the economic pressure that Iran is under cause them to blink, or does ever rising energy prices cause the West to blink? And the answer is the UAE blinked first. They're under tremendous pressure right now. They've done two things in the last week. First, they asked the Federal Reserve for a swap line, and then they pulled out of OPEC. What's going on there? First of all, UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, everything else, that's kind of like the playground for the rich. Very expensive places to live, very high chic kind of city, and no taxes. And it's been very, very popular with the nightlife and everything else. So there's a lot of very wealthy people there. Well, you don't have to be a wealthy person to know that if you're spending a lot of money to live in a very chic place, that when you're getting droned and missiled, that's not a good thing. And those people want to leave. Now, the UAE's got their currency's pegged to the dollar. So it's fixed to the dollar. And when those rich people leave, they want to convert their money to dollars. And so they don't have enough dollars for all of those rich people that are trying to leave. That's why they were asking for a swap line with the US, because what they were basically saying to the Fed is, look, we own I think well over $100 billion of treasuries. Do you want us to sell all these treasuries to meet all of these people that want to leave our country because they want to cash out and go home to whoever their original country was? Or do you want to give us a temporary loan, a swap, in order to meet that need? And it looks like we're going to do the temporary loan swap thing. And it'll be collateralized by their treasuries, so very little risk of loss. So the point is, that is a signal that they are under enormous pressure. They are also looking at damage of reputation, physical damage from all of the attacks that they have had, and they're going to need to raise money. And they cannot be choked by the rules of OPEC. So they've said, we produce about 1.5 million, 2 million barrels a day, but we've spent a lot of money modernizing our oil fields. We think we can go to 5 million barrels a day. And That's what they ultimately intend on doing once all of this gets resolved. They said it will take time. They will do it slowly. They won't try and immediately go there. But I think that that's where they're going. So those that say this is ultimately bearish for the price of oil, bullish for the global economy, you're right. But we first got to get the Strait open because they're not producing anything because they only have one pipeline that goes around the Strait, which is about 500,000 barrels a day. And they need shipping to return to normal in the Strait. So getting back to what I said earlier, if we were to just pack up and leave and say, we took care of the nuclear situation, that's it, it's for others to solve the Strait, we're not going to see any benefit from the UAE leaving the OPEC because they're not going to be able to get tankers in to get that oil moving through the global economy.
And what's to stop Iran from inflicting more damage? Hey, look, you bombed the heck out of our country. We're going to make this pain last a little bit longer for you.
That's exactly what they're threatening. What they're threatening is that we're kind of at, Axios described it yesterday as a Cold War. The good news is there's no shooting, so nobody's being killed. The bad news is there's also no peace. There's no shipping. There's no crude oil, LNG, fertilizer, or helium. Helium is a byproduct of natural gas production, and fertilizer is also a byproduct of what's done in the Gulf too. There's none of that moving. So we're kind of stuck in this stalemate where nothing is moving. Now, one of the arguments that's been made is the administration might start attacking them to try and open the Strait. But the Iranians are threatening, look, we've had 3 weeks. We've got our drones gassed up and ready to go. We're not going to make the first move. But if you attack us, we will blow up Saudi installations. We will blow up UAE installations. We will blow up Omani installations. We will Kuwaiti installations, Iraqi installations. We will cripple the ability of the Gulf to produce oil. So if you start the war, we'll go straight to $200 on a barrel of crude oil. That's their threat. Whether or not they can follow through on it remains to be seen. But for right now, we're not going to any kind of kinetic action to try and open the Strait, and they're not firing. But if that changes, we'll have to see which way they go with it. I think the threat should be taken seriously. They have drones and missiles. They have fired them at their neighbors to try and damage their oil facilities. They have done some damage to their oil facilities. So it's not like they haven't done it in the last month to 8 weeks. They have. And it's not like they won't do it again. They probably will. The question is, how effective will they be? That we don't know at this point.
What about the idea that, let's say we reach some kind of peace agreement, what's to stop them from going for a nuclear program? So we're dealing with this issue 2 years from now.
That's a good question. And that's what you'd hope that the peace agreement would have in place, that they are neutered from doing that they cannot finance their proxies, that they cannot secretly go for some kind of nuclear facility. That's why Donald Trump always refers to that we have to get the nuclear material. He calls it nuclear dust because I guess it's not like hard rocks. It's literally like a dust. We need to get all of their nuclear enriched uranium back, and so therefore they have none. So if they have no uranium, you're not going to have a nuclear program. You would hope that if we get an arrangement that it's largely understood that that's what they would get and that's credible and that this threat is behind us once and for all.
And then I guess maybe another issue is who are they dealing with in Iran? Because a lot of the leaders have been killed.
Donald Trump is accused of putting out tweets and statements to try and manipulate the markets all the time because, unfortunately, we look at the performance of the stock market, the performance of crude oil, we being everybody in the that's following the war, as a barometer as to how things are going. In fact, I even mentioned the price of crude oil earlier on this call as implicitly as a barometer of this. And so yesterday, Donald Trump tweeted out 60 seconds before the stock market opened, when the price of crude oil was surging yesterday, that Iran has no leader and they're trying to work out who their leader is. But Iran tells us they want the Strait of Hormuz open. To which I asked myself, well, wait a minute, if they have no leader, then who is this Iran that told you that you want the Strait of Hormuz open? You can't say that they both have no leader and they also gave you a statement that they want the Strait of Hormuz open at the same time. So you get all of this kind of at the same time. So yeah, you're right. I don't know who they're talking to. I don't know if they know who they're talking to. My understanding is we are not talking to the Iranians directly. We are talking to the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis are talking to the Iranians. That's that old Taylor Swift song. My friends are talking to your friends who talk to me. And that seems to be how we're doing this right now. It's good to have an intermediary. It's better than not have an intermediary. But at some point, if you're going to get a deal done, you're going to have to talk to the other party directly. We're not there yet.
So if you were looking out 3 months from now, Jim, what would be your best guess of what this looks like and what we'll be dealing with?
So this is where I'm going to preface that I really hope I'm wrong. And that is, I am worried that we are going to see this become more protracted than we all hope or want. Not necessarily kinetic in that we're killing people, but that this kind of Cold War stasis just drags on and drags on. And I'll say this bluntly to get my point across. We, being the U.S. military, not necessarily the president, but the U.S. military, do not have a military solution for opening the Strait of Hormuz. If we did, it would be open. And this would be a far different war. Imagine if we were talking about this exact war, except 100 ships a day were going through the Strait of Hormuz as the war was going on. We would be talking about this about as much as we're talking about Venezuela, which means not at all. This whole conversation we're having today would have been about AI, which is the other big issue in the market right now. But the reason that we're talking about this is we don't have a solution to asymmetric decentralized war. That's a fancy way of saying the Iranians have all these drones and these missiles, but mainly drones. 90% of the things they've fired have been drones. These things are light. They could be stored in a garage. They could be launched from the back of a pickup truck. They could be launched anywhere. Are they accurate? They're somewhat accurate. Are they slow? Yes. Are they easy to shoot down? Yes. But here's the problem. They can shoot them into hundreds at once. And then once you're done shooting them down, they could shoot hundreds more and hundreds more and hundreds more. And the argument is, or asymmetric warfare is, I have more drones than you have bullets. And eventually you're going to run out of bullets and I'll still have drones. And sure, they might not be accurate, but I'll shoot 50 of them at you. A couple of them will hit the target. And that's kind of where we're at. And that's why we don't have an answer. That's why shipping doesn't want to take the chance of going through the Strait of Hormuz. And we're all kind of stuck. You know, there's another line you hear from military guys that they said, you know, if you told a military officer there's a 95% chance of success in this operation, they'd sign up for that all day long. But if you told a shipper there's a 95% chance of success, they won't take that even on a bet. And I was like, but you have to understand the way that the shipper thinks. 95% chance of success means if I have 40 ships, that means 2 of them are going to sink. That means I'm going to have 20 dead sailors or mariners. That means I'm going to have billions of dollars of damage. That doesn't sound like a good deal to me. I need like something like 99 to 100% probability of success before I send my 40 ships through the Strait of Hormuz. So that's really why we're stuck here. We don't have a military solution for this. If we did, we wouldn't be in this position. Sure, we have an aggressive military that can bomb things and can attack things, but attack what and bomb what? Because of this asymmetric, fired from the back of a pickup truck. It was there 1 minute, it's gone the next minute. You know, you don't know which ones are civilian pickup trucks versus which ones are IRGC pickup trucks. You know, and so therefore we are kind of stuck trying to figure out how to handle this situation. And so my fear is this drags on and this drags on and this drags on. And we try and figure out how to deal with this. By the way, just as an aside, two other quick thoughts about this. There is an answer to this, and it's what Ukraine has been doing with their war against Russia. They have created interceptor drones. They have been able to create a defensive shield, and they have been effectively against the drones because Russia uses almost the identical drone that Iran uses to fight them off with those drones. But that's Ukraine, and it's not the US. And Ukraine is in the Middle East trying to bring their technology and trying to ramp their technology up. But there's 600 miles ashore that we're talking about here. And they'll get there, but they won't get there right away. So there is that. So I understand the military is not clueless to this risk. They understood this risk. The problem is the procurement process. How does the military buy weapon systems? Well, they go to the big weapons dealers like Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, and the like. And they say, we need a big, they refer to it as a platform. We need a platform. And then one of these big prime defense contractors says, okay, we'll design one for you in 4 years, but it's really going to be 6, and it's going to be over budget. And then you're going to buy this platform and use it for 30 years. But in this asymmetric warfare, it's more like, I need it in 2 weeks. And I need like a version 1.0 that sort of kind of works. And then we'll start working on version 1.1 that's a little bit better. And in 2 weeks after that, 1.2 that's a little bit better after that. So you're seeing the marketplace understand war is changing because of this asymmetric decentralized way. And what I'm talking about is the defense stocks have been doing very poorly during this war. If nothing else, when you have a war, you have to buy new Patriot missiles. You have to buy, new cruise missiles, new weapons, new airplanes that get shot down or blown up. And if nothing else, at least you're going to be putting in more orders to the defense contractors. And usually the defense stocks do well in a war, but they're not. This time they're badly underperforming because I think the market is starting to realize this war is different. We don't have an answer. That doesn't mean we can't have an answer. We just don't have it now. And that answer is not in the traditional defense contractors. It's in more of a tech kind of approach in thinking about war, that iteration of here's version 1, here's version 1.2, here's version 2, here's version 2.2, and just keep going and going and iterating until you get it right. And they're not set up for it. So even I think the market is kind of cluing us in that this is very different right now. And the sign of that is the Ukrainians have 700,000 Russian troops in their country, and Russia's making no progress in their war because of their advancements in drone technology. We don't have those advancements in drone technology, and we're kind of stuck without a military solution to the Strait of Hormuz.
You know, it's amazing. It reminds me of, I think it was Craig Prince, the former head of Blackwater, that's talking about warfare is changing as you've just been describing, where you send out a drone that costs, what, 10, 20,000, and we're trying to shoot it down with $1 million missile.
You know, not only that, but Ukraine, Zelensky made an announcement on April 13th that they not only use unmanned aerial drones, they also have unmanned surface vehicles, that roll around with guns on the top of them. And earlier this month, at the beginning of this month, they had a battle with human Russian troops against completely unmanned vehicles, both aerial and ground vehicles. And the unmanned vehicles beat the human Russian troops, took some territory, and the Russian troops actually surrendered to the unmanned vehicles. And that was the first time that that's ever happened, that somebody won a war without putting a soldier in harm's way. And Nick Kristof, who's a columnist at the New York Times, I think summed it up best. He called it the Agincourt of the 21st century. Now, Agincourt was a battle in 1415 where the English were greatly outmanned by the French, and the English introduced a new technology called the longbow. And they won the war even though they were unmanned 5-1. And everybody walked away from that battle and said, the nature of war is forever changed. And a lot of people are looking at what just happened in the Ukraine and saying, the nature of war is forever changed right now. It's about cheap. It's about unmanned. It's about iterating. So you put together some cheap unmanned system. I find a solution. You then iterate yours to counter my solution. I iterate mine to counter your solution. And it's not call up Blockade and they'll say, we'll have something for you to be perfect in 4 years. No, I need it in 4 days is what I needed. And that's how things are changing in the nature of war. And it's not putting humans in the line of fire. It's more putting unmanned vehicles in the line of fire. So yes, it's changing quite a bit.
One final comment. Given that this may go on much longer than we anticipate, that the price of oil may be much higher than we anticipate, or even higher, what about the midterms? I mean, the president has got to know that this is not popular right now. And, when it comes to the election time in November, people talk about dinner table issues, the price of food, the price of gasoline, price of utilities, and whoever's in charge usually gets blamed for it.
You're right, and he is, and the numbers look fairly dire for the Republicans in the midterm. Now, that is a concern for them. Now, I think that there's two things to keep in mind. The midterms are still about 6 months away. There's two things you could argue that maybe, I say it's going to be protracted, and maybe that protracted is 2 or 3 months. And, by the time you get to November, we're on the backside of this and oil prices are coming down and everything else. The other argument you could make if you're a Republican is maybe the public does believe that while I don't like what I'm seeing at the pump, I understand that this is somewhat necessary and willing to tolerate it. Maybe they come around to that thinking. Why would they come around to that thinking? I'll throw out this one anecdote. After October 7th, we saw a lot of protests, pro-Palestinian protests. After we pulled Maduro out of Venezuela, we saw a lot of pro-Venezuela protests. I'm not seeing a lot of Iranian protests, pro-Iranian protests right now. It's not that there's zero, but there's very, very few compared to what we've been accustomed to for the last couple of years. Nobody wants to step up and argue that they're in favor of what Iran was doing and in favor of the Iranian regime. So maybe, I'm just throwing out an argument here, that the public comes around and thinking that, this was kind of necessary. I don't like what it's doing with the price. And maybe they'll be a little bit tolerant. But I keep using the word maybe because the polling is suggesting at the moment they're not thinking that way. But it's still 6 months away. So we'll see.
All right. Well, listen, Jim, as we close, if our listeners would like to follow you, you put out a lot of good stuff. How could they do so?
Yeah, so a couple things. You can follow me on social media at Bianco Research, our research arm, on Twitter X, on LinkedIn, or Jim Bianco, my name on LinkedIn and on YouTube. We also manage a fixed income total return index. Our partners at Wisdom Tree have an ETF that follows it, WTBN. Wisdom Tree Bianco Nancy is the ticker. And you can find out more about that at biancoadvisors.com, the website that's dedicated to our index.
All right. Well, listen, Jim, as always, pleasure having you on the program. I couldn't think of anybody I wanted to talk to more after the Fed meeting. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
To speak with our financial planning and wealth management team, give us a call at 888-486-3939. Or you can also visit us on our website, financialsensewealth.com. If you aren't already a subscriber to our weekday podcast and would like to listen to more of our content throughout the week, go to Financial Sense and hit the subscribe button.